Okay, talk about the Formula 1 news. Major update on the 2026 regulations. F1 reveal in some detail precisely what is changing and what it's going to look like on track next year, not just for the fans, but also for the drivers, and how radically things are departing from the most recent regulation set that we have had, but also what the teams are going to look like in terms of competition. Ferrari say they have no clue how competitive they will be. Red Bull reportedly are having some issues with their engine development, although it might not be as bad as Max Verstappen could be fearing. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We'll start with this because 2026 is going to be the Madrid Grand Prix for the first time. They have a 10-year contract. The Mad Ring, if you guys are unfamiliar with the horrific name they've come up with for this one. Reportedly though, things are looking pretty good. It's passed the examinations. It doesn't appear to have been built yet as far as I can tell, but it appears that at least they are ticking the boxes in terms of where the gravel's going to be, the walls, the Tech Pro barriers. So it's been approved by the FIA to be Grade 1 listed, but I think there's still a fair bit of work to do to make sure this Grand Prix is in time. It's worth noting the Madrid Grand Prix is right at the end of the European stint next year, so they have time to prepare it. There was a rumour a couple of weeks back that if the Madrid Grand Prix is not ready in time, we will do Imola instead for another year. Time will tell if that comes true or not. We also saw yesterday confirmation that Portimao will be on the calendar in 2027 and 2028. But it does not appear that that will be the only Grand Prix with Madrid that's happening in the Iberia region, because apparently we're going back to Barcelona, baby. And I'm actually buzzing about this. You guys know that I love this track, and I'm not exactly sure why I love Barcelona Catalunya as much as I do, but I just think it's a beautiful circuit. It's got great history, it's got a bit of everything, some straight, some high speed, some low speed, some medium speed corners. The first few corners, turn 1 really through to turn 6, produce some fantastic racing, wheel-to-wheel action. The track is wide enough to allow for multiple lines. Yeah, dirty air has historically been an issue here, and sometimes Barcelona was a procession, but only I think because it really shows where the performance of the cars are, and the best cars like the Mercedes in their heyday would just dominate around this circuit because they didn't need to compromise as much as the other cars did, and it's difficult to come up with a good compromise around Barcelona, why it's such a great testing circuit, because it's got a bit of everything. Now look, did I love that last chicane? No, but now it's gone. They finally fixed the track, and now they're removing it off the calendar for some horrific, I think anyway, street circuit in Madrid. So definitely not in favour of that. But if we do have to have a Grand Prix in Madrid, then I thought it was a bit of a shame to lose Barcelona for it, and apparently it will rotate Barcelona with Spa. So we know that Spa is going to move to a rotational basis, and look, I'm not saying I'm happy with this. I would prefer both of them to be on the calendar every single year. But if we are going to have Spa rotating with something, I would prefer it to rotate with Barcelona than I would for it to rotate with another street track in who knows where, right? So Spa is only getting a deal for alternating years. There has been a fair bit of talk, could they do it with Hockenheim or something like they used to do with the German Grand Prix back in the day? But 27, 29, 31, those are the dates for Spa. It's obviously happening next year as well. But in 2028, 30 and 32, reportedly it will alternate with Barcelona. So we are moving to this world where there's kind of one of those European Grand Prix is going to be an alternating one. Look, I do think it's a loss for Formula 1 not to have Spa every year. This has been confirmed now for a long time. That is not new news. The news is that Barcelona will potentially be its alternating replacement, which of the options is absolutely the option that I would go for. So I'm pretty happy about this. But yeah, as everyone, tweet your thoughts in the comments below. We're getting Portimao anyway in 2027, 2028. I hope that at that time we have some other purpose-built racetracks not disappearing from the calendar, as they may well continue to do. But let's talk about 2026, because a lot has happened today. This is a new image and a new render of what the 2026 Formula 1 cars are going to look like. Is it the best livery that they've come up with here? I don't think so. I don't really think it shows off what the car actually looks like. The image I showed you guys in the intro, I think, does a better job of showing off what the front wing and the shape of the car is actually going to be for 2026. Again, this is a mock-up of how you could build a car to these regulations. Whether the teams will come up with different ideas, of course they will, right? How different and how departed they will be from this look is a good question, but this is another look from the top-down view of the car. We can very clearly see here the intended aerodynamic design of these cars, right? The idea is from the front wing to certainly these barge boards to prevent as much outwash as possible, so the teams really like to churn up the air and throw it around to the outside of the car so that it doesn't interfere with their own aerodynamics. Obviously, these cars have less downforce anyway than the previous iteration did. They are rumoured to be about 3 to 4 seconds per lap slower than last year's cars, despite almost certainly being faster in a straight line as a consequence, especially because of the active aero that we will go on to discuss. But the front wing end plates and the barge boards intending to keep the air inside the car, which should be better for the car following closely behind. This is another angle of what the 2026 cars are going to look like. Again, I think the red and the black makes it difficult to see fully what's going on, but the front wing is a very noticeable feature. And look, do the cars look good? Absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, the cars look pretty good. Are they as small and as agile as I think we would like them to be? No, but maybe we're slowly getting there. Now, this middle screenshot is worth a couple of sentences on before we discuss some of the other things that are happening. These are blinkers on the wing mirrors. So modern cars on the road, you see this quite often nowadays. You've got indicator lights on the wing mirrors. It's kind of the same thing here, in a slightly different way, but this is another screenshot from the video that F1 Media put out today, just to add some visibility, really, in the same way that it is in real life. If it's raining or if it's foggy or whatever, those can be somewhat useful. We know that the cars have the rear rain lights that flash red. It's a similar story here with what's happening on these blinkers on the wing mirrors, so that's an interesting change that I don't believe we'd really seen or talked about before today. But there's plenty else confirmed as well. Now, lots of this we already know, but just to run through what they've talked about today, what they've revealed, and how they're describing certainly the changes that we will see next year on track compared to what we currently have. We know, of course, the cars are shorter, they are thinner than they used to be. Not radically, but it is noticeable if you're going to see it side by side. The wheels as well are also thinner, which means the car even gets thinner than it otherwise was, but also means less grip for the wheels, for the tyres, and as a result, questions on how much grip these cars are going to have, because they've got the same power, but they have less downforce, less grip to compensate. This is the big change, is active aero, right? So you can see at the rear that effectively DRS is still here, right? So there is a drag reduction system on these cars, but it's not what it used to be. And I think it's going to be, this to me is the key problem area of these regulations. And I do not have much optimism that this is going to go down very well. And I'm not convinced that in 2027 things aren't going to radically change, because I think there's a good world here where what we currently are dealing with will need major revisions and will cause major problems. And I wanted to go through a couple of what those issues might be. But it's worth noting, this active aero, this is not for the purposes of overtaking. This is purely every lap, all the time, the teams and the drivers on their switch, on their steering wheel, will change between the two. So effectively, the rear wing will have a DRS mode, as will the front wing, and on the straights, they will be in that DRS mode, and in the corners, it will revert back using hydraulics or electrical actuators. We discussed that over the last few days and what some of the teams are trying to pull off. Apparently, they will alternate between the two respective positions. So both wings have movable elements that will balance drag and downforce. Now, of course, you might argue, and fair enough, well, why? If it's not for overtaking, then what's the point? Well, the point is because the hybrid engine is now so thirsty. It's 350 kilowatts. The ICE is 400, so it's basically 50-50. It used to be from 2014 onwards roughly 15%. It's now near enough 3 times that number. So it's a thirsty electrical battery, thirsty electrical motor, and as a result, it needs lower downforce to compensate in a straight line. So that's why this is happening. It's a discussion that the FIA will not exactly like to avoid, because there's going to be a lot of talk about active aero, and you'll see it all the time, the drivers switching between the modes. But it's not used for the purposes of overtaking, and it creates massive issues when it comes to different grip positions. I wanted to spend a little time talking about why I think this is so problematic. So, key thing to keep in mind, when it rains, we deactivate DRS, right? Because it creates lower grip at the rear, it creates dangerous scenarios potentially. But what if it rains in 2026, which it will at certain circuits, so we disable it, right? They have to use the cornering mode, but that creates a raft of issues because there's a reason why this is here in the first place, and it's because we need those different aero modes in order for the cars to even really work, because otherwise they have no energy, they're running out of power at the end of a straight. It's, you know, the drivers say it's a disaster. So they've done this to compensate, but if it rains, if there's low grip conditions, then what do? Not go racing? The cars already have less downforce than before, but they've still got the same power. And now because they've got this massive electrical motor, they generate even more torque. So driving them will be very tricky. And the drivers have made that very clear. In the simulator, these cars are hard to drive, especially in the rain. You know, some drivers say they're nigh on impossible in certain conditions because they've got so much torque and the tyres are now thinner than they used to be. And yeah, this will show driver skill. And I'm down for that, for sure. But because of this, can you really have these guys moving their wings to active aero positioning where they're generating no downforce? That seems potentially problematic. So they've come up with a genius solution, which is that the race directors during the Grand Prix, if it rains or something, they will decide in what zones they're able to activate it, and they will also have a partial mode where the front wing will go to straight line speed mode and the rear wing will stay as it is. So, but the race director will decide and press a button basically that says, okay, they're able to use this mode in this situation and this mode in these other parts of the track. Now that's a race director making those decisions who is not actually out there driving, so I'm sure the drivers are going to be on the radio saying, oh, we should do this and that and the other during the Grand Prix. What if there's a technical, mishap, right? The race director says, okay, in these elements of the track we're now using the partial aero mode. That therefore means that on the team's ends, they have to update that, and then when the driver presses the button, it will respond in a certain way. What if it doesn't? What if there's an error there? What if accidentally both of them go to straight line mode? Or, is there a disqualification in place for that? How does it work? I'm sure it's going to cause a load of issues, and I can imagine we are getting a ton of technical directives this year. And this is not even for overtaking, right? This is purely a consequence of the way that the engines have been designed, that we need to come up with all of this BS, basically, to deal with it. And that's before we even get to the other complicating factors, which we are going to get into now. So some safety improvements worthy to note as well. The power unit, of course, we've discussed in detail some of the implications of that. The reduced downforce on the floor, so the Venturi tunnels are gone, which means there's some more flexible setup opportunities. They can maybe run with a bit of rake. There's opportunities like that. So that's pretty exciting. I think generally this is a step in the right direction for the regulations. The fuel, of course, was also discussed. But then we've also got the boost, the overtake, and the recharge. So just to quickly make this clear, as Ferrari describe in their announcements, what used to be called the manual override mode, this is effectively replacing DRS. So while there is still a drag reduction system, we do have a DRS replacement, which is the manual override mode, which means that when you have the boost, which is the same as it used to be, you can press a button, deploy more electrical engine power than you used to be able to. You can now do that if you are within a second of the car in front for longer, right? So you've got boost, or as it used to be known, overtake. So, let's just spend a little bit of time on this terminology. So what used to be called overtake, which is the ERS button, Energy Recovery System Deployment, people would call it deployment or whatever, that is now being called boost, and kind of like a boost plus mode, which only is available if you're within a second of the car in front, that is now being called overtake mode. So there's some change in terminology there. They're also trying to get away from the word harvesting. So we talk a lot about harvesting and clipping at the end of straights and stuff like this when the energy is being harvested by the MGUK and currently the MGUH, but that's disappearing next year. That's now going to be called recharge, and that's its own mode. So basically the drivers will get to flick between boost mode, overtake mode, recharge mode. So this is the idea. This is how the FIA and F1 have mocked it up. Whether it will actually be used like that, good question. But recharge mode is no battery deployment, even though I'm sure there will still be some, that it'll be mostly recharging. Boost is like standard deployment, and then overtake is if you're within a second of the car in front, you can use extra energy to try and make an overtake happen. So It's all a bit of a mess. Now, the other thing that's worth noting is that for overtake modes, in the same way that with DRS, if you're within a second at a detection point, there is only going to be one detection point per lap. So if you are within a second at this hypothetical red line or whatever track this is meant to be, then you will be able to use it in all of these future locations if you so choose to do so. The driver in front is free to use their boost to defend, but they will not have the overtake manual override mode as it used to be known. So, hopefully that explains a little bit as to what's going on. They did the whole video of it really, but that's just the way things currently are, some of the complications that have been foreseen. The other discussion is around how important the engine is going to be, because as you can tell from our discussion over the last 15 minutes or so, it's all engine related to a degree. All of this stuff is to do with the engine. And yeah, the aero will be important, but if you've got a better combustion engine, if you've got a better electrical deployment, you will, and it's not called that anymore, let's call it boost mode, because they were not allowed to use, I don't know, deployment is apparently not a term that's going to be used. Whatever, right? That's what we currently understand. So wrap your head around all that. We'll have to be doing that a lot over the next couple of months. But let's talk about what the cars are actually going to do. Ferrari, Red Bull, some of the big discussions of the day. Rubens Barrichello gave some thoughts on Hamilton and said, look, Hamilton's a great champion. I've not spoken to him about the situation at Ferrari, so it's difficult to assess, but Hamilton is more under pressure and under closer scrutiny at Ferrari than he would be at any other team. There was also some talk from Antonello Coletta, who was rumoured, because he's leading up the WEC project that has been very successful for Ferrari over the last couple of years, especially at Le Mans, of replacing Fred Vasseur, and he says, each of us follows our own path, we all work in the same company, I see nothing strange in these links. In F1, this is an important period of change with the new regs. We trust the people in place. I have a great relationship with Vasseur. We remain focused on our work. So pretty interesting. He kind of says, oh, I'm not surprised that people were linking me to that role. We're all part of the same team, so it could make sense. But he's got confidence Vasseur's going to continue to do a good job. But let's be honest, Vasseur's job is on the line this year if things do not work out. Hamilton even says that he's praying that what we have in 2026 is better than what he has deemed the worst set of regulations that we've ever had in Formula 1, at least while he's been driving. From 2022 and beyond, of course, you might expect Hamilton to say that because it's been the least successful period of his career over the last few years. But equally, I think he has a point to an extent on what we have seen over the last few seasons. And in 2026, some of that I imagine could be reversed. But as I say, there will be other issues that will need managing. And the drivers who are able to manage that change the best are probably going to be the ones that end up coming out on top next season. So it's going to be fascinating as much as it may be incredibly chaotic and problematic. And I'm sure that some teams and drivers will not be at all happy about it. Here's Hamilton in New York. He's done one of his annual running videos. So, it's interesting to see what the weather's looking like out there. And just funny to see him running around, really. People probably not knowing who this guy is with the purple glasses on running around behind them. I'm sure, obviously, people would probably recognize him, but he loves doing these little videos at about this time of the year. But Fred Vasseur says he has no clue how competitive Ferrari are going to be. He's hoping, of course, they believe that they will be competitive. But I will say Ferrari this year, there was so much optimism last year. Let's not forget all the talk about the S25. And to be fair, for good reason, right? They'd come on strong at the end of 24. Felt like next year Hamilton was joining. There was going to be room for optimism. But the car didn't deliver. And as a result, they were floundering when the season properly got underway. Even when they did manage to come pretty good in China, they got themselves double disqualified. So Vasseur is playing down expectations, says that he's got no clue how competitive the team is going to be. It's also difficult to judge Red Bull. There is an argument, probably a fair one, that Red Bull put so much emphasis and effort and upgrade into 2025 because they recognise to a degree 2026 is probably not looking that good. John Noble gave some thoughts on this actually, did an article here for The Race when he said the following: Red Bull's own engine project, bolstered by the recruitment of a sizable number of ex-Mercedes staff, is said by sources to not be in too bad a shape, even if things may be a bit rough early on in terms of eking out the best performance and nailing reliability. So that's pretty interesting. That is at least the current rumour. That Red Bull, they're not going to be quite there with Mercedes. Let's not forget when Horner said it would be embarrassing if they were for Mercedes. So not probably the best sign of things to come. and probably expected that sources suggest reliability might not be great, the performance might not be ideal either, but it's apparently not too bad. But probably the reliability will be the main issue. Again, you might be able to crank the engine up in terms of performance and maybe even match Mercedes, but if you do so, are you going to be running into potential Ferrari 2022 related issues? Almost certainly. So that's how things, it seems, currently look. Again, it will be critical because if the car is slow and the engine is slow but reliable, Max isn't going to be happy. If the car is fast, the engine is fast, but the car blows up every so often, Max is also not going to be happy, but which eventuality would he prefer? I think that's a good question. But the reality is it might not matter, because with all the drama that does continue behind the scenes at Red Bull and Max Verstappen being scouted, not even scouted is the wrong word, but Max being wanted by other teams such as Total Ball from Mercedes and certainly Aston Martin too, because they need one or two drivers, you would imagine, over the next couple of years. There will be key questions that continue to be raised. But very much into your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.